India recently crossed the $4 trillion GDP mark, a milestone that has been celebrated as a sign of its rising economic power. It's a huge number, placing India among the world's largest economies and fueling optimism about its future. But before we get carried away by the headlines, we need to look beyond the surface. Because this big number doesn't tell the whole story. India's $4 trillion gross domestic product is undoubtedly an impressive figure, reflecting the sheer scale of its economic activity. However, when you divide that massive number by its population of over 1.4 billion people, the picture changes dramatically. The resulting per capita income remains low, placing India in the lower middle-income category, far behind developed nations and even some of its emerging market peers. This stark contrast highlights a fundamental challenge. A large economy doesn't automatically mean a prosperous population. This brings us to a crucial distinction in economics: the difference between GDP growth and a genuine improvement in the standard of living. While a rising GDP is often seen as a sign of progress, it's merely a measure of the total value of goods and services produced. It doesn't tell us how that wealth is distributed or whether it's translating into better lives. For the average citizen, with access to better health care, education, and opportunities, for millions of Indians, the headline growth numbers feel disconnected from their daily reality. This disconnect is at the heart of a significant risk facing the Indian economy: the middle-income trap. This is an economic phenomenon where a country's growth stagnates after reaching a certain level of income, failing to transition into a high-income, developed economy. Countries get stuck because they can no longer compete on low-cost labor with poorer nations. But they also lack the high-end innovation and productivity to compete with advanced economies. Without fundamental structural changes, India's impressive growth trajectory could hit this very wall. A major symptom of this potential trap is economic growth that fails to create enough high-quality jobs. The Indian economy is expanding, but this expansion isn't generating the kind of stable, well-paying employment that can lift large segments of the population into the middle class. Many of the new jobs being created are precarious, informal, and offer little in the way of benefits or long-term security. This pattern of jobless growth is a warning sign that the foundations of the economy may not be as solid as the GDP figures suggest. This issue is particularly acute for India's massive youth population, which should be its greatest demographic asset. Instead, the country is grappling with high rates of youth underemployment, where young, often educated, individuals are working in jobs that don't fully utilize their skills or provide a decent living. A large portion of the workforce remains in the informal sector, outside the purview of labor laws and social safety nets, which perpetuates a cycle of low wages and instability. This is a massive waste of human potential that undermines long-term sustainable development. One of the core reasons for this employment crisis is that the manufacturing sector has not grown fast enough to become the engine of job creation it needs to be. Historically, manufacturing has been the pathway for developing countries to absorb large numbers of workers from agriculture, providing them with more productive and better-paying jobs. Despite initiatives like Make in India, the manufacturing sector's share of GDP has remained stubbornly stagnant, failing to create the factory jobs, that powered the economic transformations of countries like China and South Korea. With manufacturing lagging, the burden of absorbing India's vast and growing workforce has fallen on the services sector. While India has a world-class IT and business services industry, these high-skill sectors can only employ a relatively small, highly educated fraction of the population. The rest of the services sector is dominated by low productivity, low-wage jobs in areas like retail and personal services, which cannot provide the same ladder of upward mobility that a robust manufacturing base can. This imbalance creates a two-tiered economy, with a small high-skill elite and a massive low-skill workforce. So, what is driving this GDP growth if not manufacturing and high-quality job creation? A closer look reveals that much of the expansion is fueled by private consumption and government spending. Indian consumers are buying more goods and services, and the government is investing heavily in infrastructure, both of which boost economic activity in the short term. But relying on these two engines alone is like trying to fly a plane with only one wing working properly. The problem with growth driven primarily by consumption is that it is fundamentally unsustainable. Without a corresponding rise in incomes, people can only spend more by either earning more or by taking on debt. If wages and salaries aren't growing, a consumption-led boom will eventually fizzle out or lead to a dangerous buildup of household debt, creating risks for the entire financial system. Sustainable growth requires a cycle where rising productivity leads to higher incomes, which in turn fuels consumption. At the same time, this growth model is exacerbating inequality. While the overall economic pie is getting bigger, the slices are being distributed more unevenly than ever before. The benefits of growth have been disproportionately captured by a small segment at the top of the income ladder, while the majority of the population sees little improvement in their economic circumstances. This rising inequality is not just a social issue, it's an economic one, as it can dampen overall demand and lead to social and political instability. Another significant weakness in the Indian economic story is its performance on the global stage. The country's export competitiveness has been weak, meaning its goods are often not competitive enough in terms of price or quality on the international market. A strong export sector is vital for earning foreign currency, creating jobs, and driving productivity improvements, as domestic firms are forced to compete with the best in the world. Without a strong export engine, India is missing out on a key driver of sustainable growth. Underpinning many of these challenges is the issue of low productivity growth. Productivity, the efficiency with which inputs like labor and capital are used to produce goods and services, is the ultimate source of long-term economic prosperity. For years, productivity growth in India has been sluggish across most sectors, including agriculture and manufacturing. This means that even as the economy grows, it is not becoming more efficient, which limits its potential for future income growth and development. This low productivity has also meant that India has not been able to fully capitalize on global supply chain shifts. As companies around the world look to diversify their manufacturing bases away from China, India is seen as a potential alternative. However, challenges related to infrastructure, complex regulations, and a lack of skilled labor have meant that it has not captured as much of this opportunity as other countries in the region, like Vietnam. These are missed chances to build the manufacturing base that the country desperately needs. This is why the $4 trillion headline figure can be a trap. Celebrating this number without addressing the underlying weaknesses in job creation and productivity can breed complacency. It can create an illusion of success that masks the deep structural problems that could derail India's long-term growth story. The real measure of success is not the size of the GDP, but its quality and inclusiveness. Ultimately, India's long-term economic success will not be determined by reaching arbitrary GDP milestones like $4 trillion or $5 trillion. It will depend on whether the country can solve its fundamental challenges, creating enough quality jobs for its young population, building a globally competitive manufacturing sector. So, the next time you hear about India's impressive GDP figures, remember to ask the important questions.